And we are live. Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to another high speed exercise where we go through multiple pages within 1 hour. And your host today is Manuel, which is my intention because just before I started, I realized that the hosting frame, is really interesting, right? So it's like, what's the other side of being a vassal? Well, like preparing the vessel. It's allowing the other to manifest within. So I've been thinking a lot about the sides, right? Because there's a side that is hosting, and the side that is inviting in. There's a side, and then there's a side that is coming in, that is acting, and you have that frame in the sexuality, right? Like the one enters and the other one receives. Um, so I I want to color that in a little bit, not in the graphic manner, but more in the like, what are the requirements, right? Like what are the things that are necessary, and where interaction takes place. Because well, yeah, like the feminine and the masculine and their relationship has been coming up this week again a lot. Like a lot of women are accentuating the feminine side of God, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't, like, tell me what this thing is that you're talking about, and then we can go on, and then it's silent. Um, So yeah, I don't know what's going on there, apart from uh, misguidance, but maybe someone else has more light for that. Mark, you can purr this along.
Yeah, so as usual, again, my attention is just to point out the things that people might be missing about what's relevant, let's say, for today in these chapters. And I haven't thought much about, because there's just so much going on recently. I haven't thought much about all of the things that are happening and all the implications of it. But I'm sure as we go, we'll find a way to exemplify that. Castle.
Sure. So I've got my intention here as walking on eggshells. We're going to be talking about taboos in a minute. I want to be kind of delicate in that area, but also we've got spy talk coming up in the following chapter, which I think we'll get to today. And so there's a lot of the stuff about the connection between how a person is walking, their attention to their footing, and the way that they're stepping or how their grounding is. And then there's a lot of this will probably come up with respect to lineage in terms of how you're grounded in the taboo section, but then also how you're grounded within your society and those sorts of things, and then getting into grounding with respect to another the intercommunal level, especially if you're the invader, that sort of thing. If you're a spy trying to uncover secrets or in a certain way cover your tracks on your way out of that other environment. So just kind of thinking a little bit about footing and grounding for this one. Christopher, will you please go?
Yes. I've set this, my intention here is watching the flood, because we're in a section of chapters here in the book that are all about, the domination of time stuff and flooded state, different types of flooded states. And you can also see a lot of that happening if you pay attention to, the news and whatever. There's a lot of people who are noticing stuff and freaking out about it. And, maybe you could have seen it coming or not before this, but yeah, lots of weird disconnections kind of going on in the world, and yeah, very related to what's happening in the book. So
Yeah. Let's get this going. Yeah. Move you all to the side. There we go. Sexuality as a microcosm. So yeah, like I'm relatively sparse again in my notes, so there's not much going on, which means that we probably have a lot of speed going. Yeah, so the sexual. Oh wait, that's not on the right screen. The sexual taboos preserve familiar space from dominion of cyclical uh, time. So yeah, I guess um, if you see a taboo as a law, right? I don't, that makes more sense. I don't necessarily see them as laws. In some sense, they're also cultural uh, boundaries or something, which still preserve space, right? Like they're still doing a preservation, but um, they're doing it in the sense that uh, Brett Weinstein likes to talk about with the porcupine shooting his quills, right? It's like, okay, like it doesn't matter how you describe what's in the range that you get hurt as long as you don't enter that space, right? Like you don't expose yourself to the danger, right? And then if you don't expose yourself to the danger, then you don't have to engage with the complexity of navigating that properly. So like that's the more healthy way, right? And to bring it to well the modern taboo breaking what is it tendency, right? Like they wanna have the goals that's in the quartered off space, right? It's like, well, there's good to be found there, right? And then the question is, well, what type of good, right? But like, let's just say, well, there might actually be good, right? Because every time you quarter off a space, like you're taking the good part of it with it, and so like in some sense, that's like the redemption or something from that which is banished from participation.
So something
And
related. Oh well, sorry, I didn't.
well,
Uh,
I'll finish with this, right? And we see the dominion of cyclical time introducing itself through that back door. So
hmm.
like that's actually something that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's almost like the taboo is like it's like a signal or a curse that's been put on these behaviors. I in the footnote that's referenced there, he talks about the two mountains. You know, you had Ebal and Gerizim, and you had the thing where the cursed mountain was all negative representations of all the things that you shouldn't do. So don't do bad thing; it's all double negatives. And then you have the other one, which is do the positive thing. So you have these sort of behaviors that are that are cursed, like they're intersubjectively verifiable that they have been cursed, and then there's the sort of, to your point, like there's a flooding in of people kind of removing the barriers from the water that could wind up flooding in from the outside, and yeah, I mean, you just wind up getting more and more of this junk that winds up coming in. But to the point of the that there could be some sort of good, it's also one of those things where I've talked about before, like the definition of malice is choosing a lesser good over a greater good. So it's like, yeah, of course, there's something good about it, but if it's being swapped in place of something that's actually a greater good, then you are getting decay.
Yeah, and so like I was a little bit uh, not liking this word dominion, right? It's like it's the removal of a blessing, right? Like you said, castle or curse, like um, and then there's a regression, right? Like there's the falling into a previous state, and you can say that that's a dominion, right? And I think he's connecting the dominion with what was it? The blood justice, right? Like the blood vengeance thing, uh, which I guess you can describe as law, but like I don't know, like I'm not liking it.
Something for me, like the Dominion thing, just kind of, I guess maybe occupation or something like that might be a little bit more useful in the English context, because I'm thinking domus, like home. Like the thing of like casting the bad spirits out of a house, and then you leave the vacancy, and then a whole bunch of other ones wind up coming in. Where it's like, well, it's a dominion in the sense that they're all shacked up in the place. That you've allowed, you left the door open, and now all the random animals in the neighborhood have set up shop.
Yeah. Anyway, so to um, to go to my hosting framework, right? So if you're presupposing a host, right, and the host is hosting the divine, right, like the image of God, then if that falls away, he's still hosting, right? Like his role as a host is not removed as a consequence of him falling from grace, right? So um like I guess in that sense he would be representative of a different dominion at that point, right?
Yeah, and I think too in this context, you can swap the word dominion for tyranny here, right? Because dominion happens, right? The bad aspect of dominion is tyranny, and the good aspect of dominion might be something like rulership or even oligarchy is not necessarily as bad as tyranny. So yeah, I think that's more what he's getting at is you if you violate these principles of natural law, then you're going to end up in a problem of tyranny of time. And then if you think about what's being said about things like adultery, these are problems that tie you up in time, especially when we get to incest. I mean, obviously, that's right. You're tying time together or trying to tie time together in a bad way. And when you do that, time rules you, right? It rules the physicality, just from a scientific perspective, from a materialistic perspective, right? So I think that's because you're always under dominion of something. The question is, do you know what and how are you interacting with it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that goes back to what Manuel was saying about looking for the good in the cornered off space. Oftentimes, I mean, probably most of the time, when people are going to the cornered off space, it's the good that they're looking for is like their own enchantment with what they want. And that when you do that, that's why you get, the breaking down of space, whatever space was in there can't exist anymore because you're breaking it down. And that's why you get tyranny. So.
Yeah, so I think putting it in this frame is actually maybe a good way to start thinking about it, right? So like you're going to the strange woman, right? Like you're going to the foreign place, right? And you're planting your seed there, right? And it's like, well, like why would you want to do that, right? Well, because you want to spread your seed, right? Like you like you want to have something there, you want to make something happen. But we'll kind of get to that, right? But if you leave something in the foreign, right, like you don't have control over its expression, right? Because now there's a foreign element that is involved in the raising, right? And because it's not known to you, like you don't have proper means of interfacing with that.
And I think it's interesting there at the bottom of that paragraph where it talks about the child of such a union will have a false or ambiguous identity depending on whether or not the adultery was exposed. So there's also that kind of thing where it's like now you have this uncertainty of, is this child's connection to their past or to their identity or what have you, like, can it just explode at any moment? And that's one of those things too where it can be revealed by someone that's not even appropriate to reveal that, if there were a proper way of doing that. I saw, just kind of a random thought, but I know on Monday Father Eric kind of briefly talked about like in vitro fertilization, and I was thinking about this where it's just like, well, if you're conceived in exile, like that's something that I don't think we have enough information to even know what that does. I mean, we can probably infer based on patterns and everything like that, but there's a major thing between like the exile of child of an adulterous union versus like here's maybe even two people who are in fact in a proper marital union, and yet the kid somehow has a sort of disconnect to his past. Like there's a lack of continuity there.
Well, I think it's talking about the identity, right? So, what is your identity? Well, like that's where you source from, right? Like that's where you gain from who you are, right? So you can look at it this way, right? Like the mother is foreign, right? So she will imbue foreign elements into the child, right? So now it splits in allegiance, right? But you can also say like the paternity of the child is in question, right? So now it's like, well, are you the inheritor or not, right? Uh, like, and in some sense, right? Like now you have to rely on another principle and say like, no, like I'm gonna assign you inheritance or I'm gonna revoke that or whatever, right? And from there we can have a definite identity, right? But like if we're living in this ambiguous space, right, then it can flip left or right, right, depending on an occurrence.
And within the context of future children or siblings or something like that, or it's like, then how do you figure out the inheritance too? Or it's like, oh, well, there was, the one child from this particular union versus this one, or, oh, if you have someone that was conceived in vitro, but then after the fact, like there's a kind of traditional conception of a sibling or something like that. There's, even if you can, you would need to really have like hard and fast kind of authority from above from the parents. But then even still, like you have the rift between the siblings that's potentially there.
Yeah, and so like what you're talking about is in some sense the primacy, right? So let's say the in vitro thing or whatever, right? So you're the first, but not in all things. And it's like, yeah, like how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
So this was actually the graph where I was like, oh, you kind of want to flip this, right? Like you want to have this go horizontally, like the lineage thing. Maybe the paternity one isn't, right, because that's actually from above. But like when you have a sequence of offspring, right? Like it's not something that descends, but it's like something that unfolds across time, like a rocket with stages.
Yeah, it's almost looking at that left side one. I think we previously talked a bit about this thing of like being adopted, like spiritual adoption into a family, and so you're almost getting something like the reverse of that, where a lot of times, especially in the cases of a man has an affair or something like that, especially like historically, he would kind of hide that fact and then maybe just have like a side family or something of that sort. And it's sort of an offshoot sort of thing, or it would be a complete denial and not even attaching the name or any of these things. So you would only have the physical sort of connection, but then you have very legitimate sort of things like, I referenced before the Book of Ruth, where it's like, well, she gets adopted, and then she is technically the grandmother of King David, even though she actually wasn't, and she was in that lineage, even though she wasn't directly related because she married into the family, and then her husband died, and they never had kids.
Yeah, I think that the diagrams are more illustrating the starting point, right?
Mhm.
So you're starting at the top with confusion, and the only thing you can get are bastard offspring, right? Whereas you're starting with the unity of two people who are one in marriage or something, then you have established offspring,
Mhm.
and that's the representation. Is just what was the telos, the final cause, that tells you whether or not you're unified at the top. And if there is a unity or a union or a communion at the top, then everything down below that gets subsequently manifested will be established. We'll say properly and in a stable fashion, because there's implications from the left hand, right? Which is that's not a stable configuration because it's going to fall over basically, and
Mhm.
there'll be three parts, right? Whereas the right hand, everything's connected correctly.
Yeah, so that actually
Also with,
go ahead.
oh, I was just also with Ruth. She is a Moabite, which the Moabites are descended from Lot and one of his daughters. So
Mm. No.
So what Mark was saying actually brought me back to this divine feminine or the feminine aspect of God, right? Because I see God as the right hand side, right? Like the paternal, the origin, right? And it's like it flows from him, like, and everything gets ordered and also inherited from him, right? And I get the sense that when people are talking about the feminine part of God, that they're looking at the left hand side, right? Because they can never justify it, right? Like there's like they can't even properly talk about it. And it's like, well, like now you're just opening yourself up for an unknown entity, right? Like you're hosting an unknown entity and calling it divine. And it's like, well, maybe, but like on what basis, right? Like what is like how are you do doing this properly, right? Like that's the thing that I always get confused about. Is like how do you know this is a divine uh, element that you're hosting? Like it might be higher, right? Like sure, but like, it doesn't mean that it's divine. And that's also right because we can zoom out on these graphs, right? And then we can go to the societal level, right? And see that the confusion of the paternity or something is embedded in a higher structure that still gives things a place, right? So these things can exist and participate correctly, even if they're confused at their level. And and that's the problem, right? It's like, okay, like look, I get to participate correctly and therefore I'm not a problem. It's like, no, you're still a problem. Like you're just inheriting a solution to your problem, which and you're not grateful for it, right? Like that's maybe the worst part because now you don't see what sustains you, right? And you can't have a proper relationship to it. So this thing stood out to me, um, thinking about Noah being asleep. Um, so as the man, right, uh, you are supposed to be erect, right? Not sexually, but like standing up, right, being the pillar. And in your bed, you lay down, right? And we've been talking about the symbolism of sleep as well, right? Like that's also the laying down. It's the removal of the supervision, the vigilance, all of these things. And so there's something sacred like in that place, right? Like the place where you lay down, it needs to be removed from all of the external influences, like the most, because that's where you're the most vulnerable. And maybe it's also the place that you work to maintain, right? Like all of the work is so that you can have that place of rest, of peace, in some sense. Well, maybe that's too much, but it's at least a necessary component or something. And I think when you're looking at the pollution part, right? So it's like, so you've introduced a foreign element, right? That's not integrated, right? So if you're sleeping with your wife or whatever, right? Like you don't want her to strangle you or poison you or whatever when you're asleep, right? Like you like you can't have her be a foreign element in your bed, right? Because if that's the case, then yeah, you won't get any rest.
So you have this whole thing with undermining the hierarchical integrity, and then I actually thought it was really useful, this thing of where he points out uncovering the skirt meant corners of his father. So that just connected a bunch of stuff of like cutting corners to get a particular aim, or seeking a particular good and then cutting corners to get there. And that's essentially what's kind of happening between solicitation of a prostitute and then also the pattern of incest, is this thing of like, oh, well, I know what the proper pattern is supposed to look like, but I'm either going to look back or I'm going to look to the fringes, and then I'm going to just kind of take the piece, I'm going to cut the piece that I want, and then I'm not going to take the hierarchical responsibility that would be required. There's no continuity in any of these sorts of things. It's usually sort of one-off types of things with, the case of the, soliciting the foreign prostitute or what have you. And so it's, oh, I want to do this thing with no consequences. And then it just winds up being self-serving. So you're also not going anywhere. You're actually stagnating yourself by hitting the brakes on that.
Yeah, so the way that I'm thinking about it is like when you have a field and you set the corners to know the boundaries of the field, right? So this is an internal thing, right? It's like, okay, like now I'm exiting, right? Or like now I'm plowing beyond, right? But it's also an external thing, right? Where it's like, okay, now I'm entering onto the domain of, right? So if you're removing the markers of the corners, right, like the things that cover the corners, then the mediation becomes confused, right? Like where things end and where they begin are no longer clear, right? And so now the outside and the inside, they begin to mingle, and it's also like laying with your father's wife, right? Like, so that's means that you sow seed where your father is supposed to be sowing seed, right? So like, um, and your offspring of your father's seed, right? So like now there's a way that you're um, autonomous, right? Like you're creating yourself.
It creates a time loop, right? Again, it's the dominion of time, right? Because now you're trapped in a time. You've separated from the unity, and you're trapped in a self-referential miniature time loop. That's what technically happens.
I like the point that you made about the field. I'm just thinking about that with if you had the, if you had somebody that has a square field and they thought, oh, I don't like the hard edges. It's too well defined. I'm going to just cut the corners off of those. And then now each corner has just turned into 2 more corners. So now you just keep multiplying. And then the total surface area that you have under your dominion is actually reducing every time you keep compromising on the hard edges until now you just keep closing yourself in. So even
And it
on like the
becomes
material
round.
level, right?
It becomes a circle.
Yeah, and then that's the other thing too, is because it's not a smooth circle either. It's just a lot more points. Like it becomes like a circle of thorns.
Yeah. So I have written here like you build a relationship to your origin, but not to your source, and so not that what gives you who you are, but like you're taking the intermediary step, right? Like your mother or something, right? And so that's a form of idolatry, I guess, as well. So like I also like had this idea that incest, you could also call that like a regression, right? Like you're yeah. So I guess it's the fabric of space. Maybe anybody wants to get into that.
I mean, that's universal. Like even science thinks there's a fabric. It's space is material, right? Time is ethereal. There's no magic there. It's just pretty straightforward, actually. And yeah, when he says that self-referential feedback loops in the fabric of space, right? Because you've sequestered off a piece of time, and that's why you're dominated by it, right?
Well, you've tangled up loose threads, so instead of having like a sheet of fabric, you have a bunch of knots and tears or something in it. So
Yeah, if you've ever knitted or crocheted something and then you screw it up or you accidentally attach to the wrong thing, and then it's just like, oh my goodness, I have to go back. I have to cut off this strand so that I can start over and fix this issue.
Right, and that's the violation of the edges of the margin. And when you confuse the margin, you get into a self-referential loop. That means it never ends. Things that never end are in the realm of time, not in the realm of space. Space always ends because it's subject to entropy. Right? What's entropy? Entropy is time. When you subject something entirely to entropy, it's pure time at some level.
Yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to point out, right? So you have the incest in the sense of the perspective of the father, right? But you also have it in the perspective of the son and his fatherhood, right? Because he can also not produce proper offspring with his mother, right? Because like now his offspring is at his level, right? Like so his relationship to his offspring is like it's not progressing anymore, right? Like because he can't proceed beyond himself.
I think I just wanted to comment on the footnote of this page. There's a thing about the story of Tamar and how she's important for the lineage of David. That I just wanted to point out. I guess the word acceptable does not mean encourageable or any of these other things. Just this thing of there is a certain because there was the whole thing where Judah's 2 sons wound up dying. One of them was Tamar's husband. The other one was supposed to kind of take her as his wife. He was just trying to use her physically and not, he was trying to abdicate responsibility. He gets actually struck dead directly by God, which also her first husband had also been the same case. So it's kind of, there is also this loop that winds up happening where it's like, okay, Judah, both of your sons died. And then he goes and solicits her thinking that she was a prostitute. There's a bit of this kind of tie-in with the spy thing because she was pretending to be a prostitute, but also she literally did exactly the same pattern as a prostitute. And then she winds up becoming kind of the future mother of his children. So there is, she never actually had children with the sons. But there's something very kind of unusual about that, where she becomes the person who facilitates the continuation of his lineage. But there's so much like reversal that keeps happening in that story. That it's acceptable in the sense that there wasn't actually any like genetic damage done or anything, but pretty much everyone was at fault for something in that scenario, and it's just like moving on. Let's just pick up from here and keep going because that's.
Well, well, she was acceptable. She was acceptable in the sense that she was like the least bad person.
Right. Yeah.
Well, she redeemed something that was promised to her in the end, right? Like that's why she. So. Yeah, so I also have a note about the distinction between culture and nature, right? So I think lineages are the progression of something cultural, right? Or maybe you want to replace that with spiritual, right? But like something that is cultivated, and then like so it's it's serving something, right? Like it's glorifying something. It's and that's in opposition to nature or something, like in resistance to nature, right? Like you're quartering off that space, right, across generations from the influence of nature from the outside.
Well, I mean, cultivation is something you do upon nature, right? Or it's a attempted manifestation upon the creation or something.
Yeah, it's an answer to nature.
There's no answer to nature. It's just a refinement of it. It's the process of refining nature. As a cultivation is technically, right? You're taking things and deliberately reordering them, right? Or preventing them from ordering themselves. So.
Yeah, well, again,
Mitchell had a question.
we're getting a layer issue, but like
you want to. Well, I mean, I'm not, but nature is the lowest layer, right? It's part of creation. You want to answer Mitchell's question?
Which one?
I don't know if you saw it.
This one? Ah, yeah. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, he said you read your your notes.
So the origin is where something begins, right? And the source is where something is coming from. And so the origin is like a point, while the source is continuing.
Yeah, or the origin starts with nothing preceding it in some sense, whereas the right, the source is the implication that whatever that is still there, right? And it was pre-existing.
Yeah, so something that helps me with that is like, you see bottled water and it says bottled at the source, but not bottled at like the creation of water as such,
So you could just go to your parents, right? So your parents, they have their eggs and the sperm, right? And then they come together, right? And then something gets established, right? Like there's something new as a consequence of the coming together of the egg and the sperm, and then you have the DNA that is sourcing you throughout your life, right? But your origin is your father and your mother, right? Like you come from there, but they're not sourcing you, right? Your umbilical cord has been severed at a certain point, and now you're um, a life on its own, right? Like there's a process that has been started that's independent from its origin. And you see that with maturity as well, right? Like whenever you learn anything, right? Like you're dependent upon your teacher until you've mastered it sufficiently. Bomb. I'm gonna wall this off. Um, or are we complete on the taboo? Because I think I want to have Castle just like fall flat on his face because he's walking on his toes too much.
I got strong toes. I got those ballerina toes. We'll be fine.
I gotta provoke you, man. I gotta provoke you.
It's not gonna happen.
So I'm gonna invite everybody to respond on this idea of two spies. So I've been seeing the idea of like two messengers, right? Or two. So there's two scouts that return from scouting the promised land, right? That hold true, right? So the number of two and the going into the foreign is connected for some reason, and I don't really understand that.
Well, I'm thinking of eyeballs, and also I'm thinking of the bird that Noah sent out.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it says that Joshua is the spy. I don't know if he says it right here, if it's on the next page, but he said Joshua is the spy master. So it's almost like he's sending these two extensions of himself as to be his eyes, essentially, before he goes and enters.
Okay, yeah, that makes complete sense actually. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I wanted to say that you can replace this with mediator, right? Um, so, well, yeah, well, I guess we'll get back to that, but she's
Well, I mean, that's
in her.
happening. The mediation is happening, right? But it's as a result of her being symbolizing time.
She also, like, she's the extreme hospitality to the stranger, but then also like any understandable prostitute, she doesn't talk to the authorities. So there is that kind of subversion that's happening there, where it's like, well, she's immediately, she welcomes the strange invader essentially, and then she lies to the cops.
Which she doesn't fit in, right? She's part of the margin, and the margin is how infiltration from spies happens, right? In all cases.
So the first thing that stood out to me is that they sleep in her house. So that's kind of a reference back to the bed, right? And maybe that's also related to the transition aspect or something. And then I thought a little bit about the action of hiding, right? So that's like a veiling that she does. She's creating like an artificial water, right? An artificial surface that people can't see below, right? The police can't see below. So in some sense, that's also taking things outside of their domain, right? Like outside of their realm of influence, and thereby shielding them.
Hmm. I don't know if you've seen.
Oh,
I think it was some of those guys that were in like the special operations group in Vietnam. How when they would go and infiltrate during the Vietnam War, they would actually travel, even though it's an extreme disadvantage to cross a river, and become, just it just winds up being open season on you if people see you. But to cover their tracks, they would actually walk through like rivers and stuff for miles and miles, so that they wouldn't leave any footprints. So there is a bit of that aspect to her. It's like she's covering their tracks, and then she is kind of this watery sort of. Well, on the previous chapter, he actually says that that what the prostitute is a symbol for flooded land or something. So it is. It's like by walking into her house, it's almost as if they were walking through a river or through a bog or something like that. And that's also on the periphery, right? So you also like on the outside of you're not going to have a bog inside the city or something like that.
hmm Well, yeah, like I kind of want to get to that, right? So like she's um like a wall in two ways, right? Like so she's um like how do I say it? It's the wall of the city, uh, but it's also the wall of her house or something, right? Where there's a double functionality of the wall on two layers, right? Like and I like what Costa said about her house, right? Because I can just imagine like the house of a prostitute and the rules, right, that govern that house. And when you're coming from the rules that govern the city into the rules that govern the house, like that must seem like an ocean, right? Because like nothing functions anymore. Like the ordering is no longer present.
Yeah, I think too. RJ made a good point here. The wall is in the house that she has is inside the wall or on the margin of the city, which is more the important aspect, right? Is that idea of the margin and the porousness of the outside of the margin, right? Even though the implication is, they went into the city normally, and then we're seen going into her place, right? And yeah, that would be the thing to sort of keep aware of is all of these all of these twists. It's not a linear progression, right? It's they go into the city, they go to the margin of the city, they're hid in the margin of the city, but then they're also let out of the city through the margin and not through the normal method because they can't anymore. So it's a one-way thing to go in the front gate, right? Because after that you're caught. And so all of these are actually really important aspects uh, to sort of understanding the significance of things like spying, right? Because the whole key to being a successful spy is not being noticed when you infiltrate, right? When you come in, right? You're probably going to get noticed eventually, right? Because that's what happens in almost all cases. And so then the question is, well, how do you get out safely? Because once you're noticed, this everyone's going to be looking for you. Odds you can just walk out the normal way, the way you came in, are basically zero. And so that's the aspect is once you've been caught infiltrating, now you're exposed and you're no longer secret, and so you have to find a way around that effectively.
And to add on to that, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this a bit, but that then you have the reciprocation. I mean, the whole thing is circular, right? But then you get the reciprocation of the spies who then go and say, okay, tie, which is also a kind of circular movement, tie this line of scarlet thread around the window, which is also a peripheral portal there, and then they make the reference to blood vengeance being on their heads if they if harm comes to her. So it's just, it really is just like, it's like a hall of mirrors.
So, like this window, right, which is an aspect of the house, now also becomes a window into the city, right? So there's a doubling there, and like I feel like I want to connect this back to the incest, right? So it's like it's taking a role in the city that it's not supposed to have, right? Like it's and now it's functioning on the mediation of the level of the city where she's not supposed to exist at all, right? Like she's not supposed to partake on the city's mediation. But there's a lot in there about the fractal layers that yeah, like I don't know how to give words to it, but there's a skipping of layers of reality that get converged into her, right? And that's explicit in her role as a harlot, right? Because well, she hosts these elements, right? Like so, she's a host of elements that are not native to the city.
You know, that reminds me, you hear about like a really good hidden restaurant, and they call it a hole in the wall. You know, this thing where they're hosting certain things that are normally only available at a very high level and normally not something you can find anywhere else, you know? And so there is, I mean, that would be like the positive aspect of this sort of pattern, is you would have the hole in the wall restaurant that has all the things you couldn't find anywhere at prices less than you would normally expect, but maybe the appearances are such that you would not have noticed otherwise.
Yeah, and it's making something of the reserved available, right? That's actually not supposed to be accessible.
Yeah, and it's usually a foreign restaurant. Not always, but it usually is. I also like the thing of the exfiltration. I've just been thinking about that more, this thing of like, yeah, you are going to get spotted, like that is, but also you need to make sure that whatever it is, whatever your means of exfiltration is enough that whoever is following you, who is an insider, can actually not cross that barrier. And it reminded me, actually, this week I heard the story of, it was a legend of Saint Hyacinth of Poland, and it was during the Ukraine war, not this one, but the one between the Polish and the Mongols, back when they were the ones who were over that territory. And the Mongols were chasing him, and he the legend goes that he ran across the water, like there was like some huge body of water, and he ran across and left footprints on the water. And of course, like the Mongols couldn't get into the water, but he just booked it across. And but that just reminded me of this, where it's just like, well, you know, these guys slipped through the cracks, literally through the cracks of the wall, which was also her house, and then they leave. Interestingly, they leave a remnant or evidence of their having being there, but she admits that they were there, but says, "Oh, I don't know where they went," which, of course, it was just actually outside her window. So she's not wrong. You know, they left through the window. Like, I have no idea where they went after that. But then they deliberately leave evidence so that they can come back. Like, there's no longer a need for them to hide the evidence that they were there, because everyone already.
But the evidence is hidden because it's not.
It's on the outside.
It's on the outside. No one inside can see it.
Right.
Right. And that's actually really significant. Like, and if they did, they wouldn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
Right. Because this is the problem of perspective. Everybody says, "Well, you should read this book." You know, it's like, no. Different people have different perspectives on the same thing. And so the fact that it's a book doesn't help with that in the way that you would expect. And it's the same thing here. Like, there's a mark on the outside. Could mean anything. Who knows? Could be a mistake. Could be a piece of clothing got stuck outside the window. Could be left like, but she can't get out. To your earlier point, she can't get out because the order hasn't changed. She's in the margin until there's a new order established. Right? So you're trapped in the margin until it's all margin, because that's what happens next. Right? And then a new order is established and you are integrated into that new order. So that pattern's super important.
And of course, her state doesn't necessarily increase. Like she doesn't become a diplomat or a a member of parliament or something like that after the new order comes in as well.
So I like this idea, right? When you do the exfiltration, that you have to have a boundary. So I'm thinking about these Japanese doors, right, which are like just paper, right? And then the door gets slammed in front of someone, right? And it's like they have a force field, right? Like the idea of breaking the paper is just inconceivable, right? And I think that's kind of, well, like it's also with the red thread. It's like it cannot be conceived, the meaning of the red thread, because um, in order to do that, you have to break out of the norm, right? Like um, and so talking about breaking, right? Like what's actually happening in this story is like the harlot is literally receiving the seed of the army that is outside of the city walls, right? And she's bringing the offspring of that seed into the city, like Mark said, right? Like now it's establishing a new order, right? So there's like a flipping, like there's an inversion of identity or something, where, well, like the old identity gets flooded uh, through a penetration from the outside, right? Like I'm thinking of a cell or something, right? Like where the membrane gets broken, right? And then like whatever, like the virus comes in and like completely upsets uh, the order inside.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to touch on this in the next chapter, which we might actually get to. But the this thing of like the rebellious daughter that winds up upsetting the stability of the hierarchy, where it's like this is the rebellious daughter of Jericho on the edges that is essentially giving birth to a foreign invasion or something like that.
Yeah. So if you go to the pictures, it's interesting because on the left hand side, it's like uh, a mediation through the decoration and through the ordered right, the wall. So yeah, it's interesting that and there's the two layered aspect there. I don't have much to say there, but I think that it has to partake in both. I guess that's the point.
Maybe I should just mention the snake aspect, that you got a little red snake hanging out of the window too. I mean, just kind of the people of Jericho would probably call her a snake for doing what she did. Like all that stuff. I mean, we've already talked about all this stuff. I don't know. I see the diagram and I just see snakes now.
Well, the association I have is the tying of blood, right? So you have her blood that's being tied to Israel.
And through the promise of the return on blood vengeance, where it's like, oh, we've essentially just told you that, yeah, if anything happens to you, then as if we did it to you, let it happen onto us. So yeah, there is a connection there. It's almost like it's a spiritual blood connection, and it's like, well, if something happens, like now we're connected.
Let's engage with this. So that, oh man. I don't even know how to engage with that, but yeah, like if you're talking about the fact that the inside's identity is now in interaction with the external imposition of identity, right? And there's a way in which that scale mediation is taking place. I can kind of see that, right? So, like the way that I was envisioning it more is that the external was coming into the city, but you can also see that the identity is of the city is growing in the sense that it's in partaking in more of the world. So like, yeah, maybe that's the better way to envision it. Um, yeah, so he's talking about where is it? A pact between the harlot and the invaders, right? Like, I would argue that it's a bond, like, because she's literally being adopted. Um, but what's happening there, right? Like what they're talking about there is they're talking about what precedes the adoption, right? Like, so there's, like, I guess, a test of loyalty, right, or a proving of worthiness, and making her exceptional and thereby worthy of being adopted. Um, Also, it's kind of showing, right, like her allegiance or her identity, the source of her identity is no longer in the city, right? It's in Israel, right? Like in the army outside. They sustain her.
I wanted to mention there was the thing of like the uncovering the father's skirt, and cutting corners. That this thing of the spies uncovering the nakedness of the land. In this case of kind of turning the allegiance of this prostitute, they are. We talked about like cutting your own corners and then kind of boxing yourself in or kind of circling yourself in. But then there's this other thing of cutting somebody else's corners, and you're so in this case is like, okay, we're going to take your fringes and then start kind of integrating that on our edges and then start encroaching upon you with this. And I like it's actually a very clever line here that he says the crimson thread is used to secretly infiltrate the city and eventually unravel the entire fabric of space. So it is they leave a loose end out of the window and then they come back to tie up loose ends when the invasion starts. And and so I don't know, I really like that imagery that he left there of just like, oh well, we just have to pull on this thread here and then the rest of the stuff is going to come down.
Yeah, and that's the scale, right? That's the pattern at scale. This one thing, this one action effectively operates at 3, 4, 5 different scales all at the same time, right? And that's that alignment. I mean, that's roughly speaking, that's if you can sense that, and the problem is many people can't. But if you can sense that, that's when you get a sense of meaning. It's when one principle happens at one scale and all these other scales all at once, and you sense it. That's your sense of meaning, roughly speaking.
Yeah, and that's also a Kairos moment, right? Like that's when that interaction takes place, right? Like that's when the flip occurs. Um, I had a thing. Oh yeah, so the idea with a thread, like I don't know if you ever had that with your clothes, right? That there's this thread or even a scab or something on your skin, right? And like the thing is totally fine until you notice it, right? And then your attention goes to it, right? Like you mess with it and then you mess it up, right? And so the highlighting, right? Like shining light on the periphery and and the misalignment, right, or the lack of allegiance of that's not a problem, right? But when you start pointing it out without having a proper resolution for it, like now things start to turn around it, right? And like now it starts to gather something, right? And that can be a revolution towards you, right? And if we if we start looking at what what's happening in society, right? Like when we're trying to put the marginal things in the center, right? Like that's well, what does it mean to put something in the center, right? Well, to put it in the spotlight, right? So and then things start turning around it, right? And the things that weren't a problem, right? Because now they get garner steam, become a problem, right? And then everybody's like, "Why are you making a problem?" It's like, no, no, no. Like, putting it in the spotlight has made it a problem. So, yeah.
And there's that thing of like you get more of what you pay attention to, and it's just like, well, now you're just going to wind up inviting more of this, and then it just becomes identification against and war at that point.
Yeah. So the the story is basically also talking about, well, we were talking about a crack, right? Or the window or the thread that's being pulled on, right? So there's a proper mediative authority, which is the gate, right? And with the gate, certain limitations get set on what comes in, what comes out, right? So things get proved, and then when that mediation goes through a different channel, right? Like now proper order can't be maintained, right? And now the subversive element has means of manifesting, right? And then the subversive element in this case had sufficient strength, right, or power to actually collapse the structure of the city.
I wanted to comment on the footnote there, and of course it's also about the word foot in Hebrew. So it says that that spy in Hebrew also means foot, and then in the root for English also means to observe. So I just kind of connected that with like watch your footing, which is sort of where my intention came from for this week. But I also really like this thing of nun meaning fish, because just this week I had been I was reading this thing that was talking about how the early Christians came up with little ichthys, like fish thing. And it's like now that's just like bumper stickers and stuff, but that was actually the sign that they would have outside of underground churches. So you actually had, like, in order to maintain the community, you had this hidden signal on the outside, and you're kind of repeating this sort of pattern, but you were doing it, like kind of clandestinely with the symbol of the fish, which is also, you've got all the water stuff and everything there.
Yeah, and the association I have with that is like you're in the crowd, right? So you're visible, but you're hidden,
Mhm.
right? So you're like under the water, like the crowd is covering you,
Yeah.
and so yeah,
And,
there's hmm?
well, I was just like, you're swimming under the flood or staying under the
Right,
surface. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. I like it.
and so like I can see how Christians, right, like would be standing under the flood, right, because they were manifesting well in the spirit, right, which is literally like how is a Christian agent discernible from a non-Christian agent? Well, not really, right, until the spirit gives its fruits, right, and then you can start discerning. So um, yeah, I listened to debate on Christian nationalism, and I was like, basically the way that it was explained there was just like, no, Christians go into politics and go implement Christian values in policy, and then Christianity will get root again, right? And and that's kind of it, right? Like that's also like a fish under the surface because it's like not really imposing anything, right? It's just making things in your image, right? And then propagating yourself across time. And like, yeah, that's the proper way to manifest change. And like everybody's kind of doing that, right?
Yeah, it's unavoidable, and it's a little ridiculous because people don't realize either you participate or you get run over. Basically, right? You get tyrannized. Right? The opposite of tyranny is participation, and it may not be an option or whatever, but it's still important to realize.
And talking about participation, let's go to the Nephilim, because they have some awesome
Wow, a
participation.
third chapter in one day?
Why are you talking about turds? We were talking about taboos. Like, is this what the taboo
I
that you want to
said
bring in?
third. Watch your step, Manuel. Else you step in a third.
Uh, uh, I I don't know. Like, I think religion should manifest in the nation. So like, I don't even I don't know what the issue is here.
I liked his comment about the that in Hebrew the word for deception is a heel turn or a heel pull. This thing of like in English we've got about face, which means you made a 180. So like you're now hiding your face from the position that you're originally doing. You've completely turned, and it implies a movement of the feet, but it's got the focal point on where the person is looking.
Yeah, I just want to the idea of something like Christian nationalism or any kind of religious nationalism is silly because you're combining two things that are separate, and they are combined in your participation. The knitting, the integration of things, the knitting of things together is through participation, not opposition, because that definitionally isn't it. But it's that third thing, which is you're not getting around the nation or politics, and you're not getting around your beliefs or religion, right? You can get around your participation because you have free will, or you can use participation to create a division, which is opposition, right? But the correct answer is participation, and then it doesn't make any sense to talk about religious nationalism. Like it's not a reasonable concept or a reasonable way to talk about the world, because it's not, right, and that's explicit because it's render unto Caesar. So it's not that hard. These are two different things. They are supposed to be different, but if you think that different non-optional things in the world are things that you can ignore, then that's a different type of stupidity that you shouldn't engage in. Like politics is not going away. Caesar's not going to vanish, right, any more than your beliefs are, and you need to act out your beliefs. And if you abdicate the responsibility for politics to your enemies, they will try to squish your beliefs, because it's the same as destroying you and your lineage and your culture. And that once you kind of get it from that set of perspectives, I think it makes a lot more sense.
So I don't have too much notes. Yeah. So the first thing I had is the sons of God, right? So I rephrase that as those who were inspired by God, they were carrying His Spirit. Yeah. For the rest, I don't have any notes on this page.
Well, I think something just in this first paragraph that I had highlighted was this thing of that the individual sin in the garden and then resulting in the cosmic fall. That you see this in the diagram where there's this kind of and I think individual is appropriate here, like in the pejorative sense, where it's just like, well, the sin of individualism starts at the microcosm, and then you can see everything start spreading out and breaking and disintegrating.
Right. That was the integration I was talking about, right? Like we stand between or mediate between heaven and earth, right? That's we integrate those things, right? And if we try to not do that by being an individual, then everything falls apart above us, right? And that is exactly the point. I mean, that's also the thread running through these last 3 chapters, right? So this is all a culmination of that idea. I think it's not really a problem, but I think if you don't see when you're reading what the thread is through the sequences of chapters, because they do have a quote progression to them, right, or a weaving to them, that it's been hard to see because we've only been able to do 1 or 2 chapters recently, but now that we can do 3, you can kind of see the progression on that 3 chapter sequence, and you always want to look for that progression, and maybe it's not explicit or it's not as clear right away in the moment as you'd like or it should be, but unconsciously you're probably going to get it anyway, so that's kind of important to engage with and realize.
Yeah, so
okay.
Trying to understand this story a little bit, right? So like you have the sons of God, right? And they're looking for a place to manifest, right? Or to house, to to propagate. And so I think the beauty there is referencing to like the willingness or the availability for appropriation. Um,
You have
could
the rebellious daughters of men, and then you have the rebellious like spirits, right? Like there's a sort of compatibility with the rebellion.
like, do you want to say more on the rebellious thing? Because like I don't like why would they be rebellious?
So he says in the first paragraph that it's a cosmic fall in the Bible because it involves the downfall of heavenly angels. So that there's this whole thing of like the fall of 1/3 of the angels, and that
Hmm.
you have those ones that decided to rebel. Interestingly, like the rebellion was a single sin of pride in thought with 100% of their will set on it. So it was individualism at the scale of an angel, and that so you have all of the individualistic daughters of men that are finding themselves with the individualistic, spiritual things. And I want to tie it to the footnote on this page, which says that there's the interpretation that it's Cain's offspring and Seth's offspring, and then there's the other one that it was actual physical human females and then actual angels, and that they're not exclusive. And like I won't go into a whole thing, but there have been cases of like people actually like consecrating their children to demons or like doing weird sort of ritualistic acts and stuff. And there have been cases of children actually being possessed in the womb. Very rare, but like as a result of these sorts of things. There's also been cases that type of thing has been reversed later, thankfully. But but that is one of those things that people can participate in a higher principle, which is still very low, or a fallen principle, and that there can still be a union between a man and a woman that are just assigned to something that they've essentially given dominion over themselves to.
Yeah. So to go back to my question, right? Like, so I can see how, in the way that you described it, that they're rebellious in the sense that they inherit the sins of their father, right? Or are you talking to about a different rebellion?
Mm. Well, I mean, I guess at multiple scales, right? So you've got the rebellion against their own parents, but then also the rebellion against like the natural order, and then the rebellion against God. And like those things are kind of happening on the scale of this. If it's a spiritual thing, then you have that. And if it's between Seth and Cain's offspring, and again those aren't exclusive, then the sons of Seth in this scenario are rebelling against against their own lineage by intermarrying with the people of Cain, which would be like the Israelites intermarrying with the Canaanites or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to point out this word, right? There's a possessive element there.
Yeah. But that is something that people also, they will sometimes consent to possession is.
Oh yeah, like I bet they said yes. Like I
Right.
totally agree with that.
But I also agree, like on the supernatural level, like it is supernatural. Like that is, there's, something that is above them that is trying to do something illicit.
Yeah, so he's talking about Adam's identity, right? So I replace that with the image of God, right? Like, so they're sharing the image of God that Adam is created in. Then it's talking about wild daughters. So like I think it's important to realize, right? Like, so daughters are the ones who are most susceptible to this, right? Because uh, the sons, they're supposed to continue the line, right? So they're growing into the identity of the father, right? While the daughters are prepared to receive identity from their husband, right? So to have the corruption seep in through the angle of the daughter, or the daughters that get disconnected, right? Um, is it like a natural process, I guess? Um, so I didn't. This picture didn't really make sense. Like even this one didn't really make sense. Um,
I think what's happening here is that the uncovered daughters are trying to like go around the sons of Adam that they're supposed to be joining with to the higher foreign principles or sons of God. And that's where the rebellion is, because the sons and I mean it was bringing C.S. Lewis mentions in Narnia. He mentions the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve, and here we have the daughters going to the sons of God instead of the sons of Adam.
Yeah, we had the example of, I'm thinking of the diagram for the incest thing where you had the one loop going back by one or maybe even two, but this is like completely circumventing the entire hierarchy. Like the 100% of the lineage. So that little perforated line is just like, nope, we're cutting out not just the middle man, but actually the middleness of mankind itself, essentially.
okay, like
And then
that.
also you've got kind of they're below the flood waters on the left side there. So they're just kind of on the margins and they're not integrated into the structure. And then all of the things that are essentially below the flood waters that are no longer integrated into the structure above are, you've got like the two margins kind of, descending towards each other. So I'm getting the image of kind of like the separation of the waters, and so you got like the water below, and then you got the firmament, and this is kind of like that collapsing of the scales.
Yeah, because the space is not maintained. Yeah, that no longer held erect, which is maybe a good image of what we're dealing with, right? Because like we see a bunch of people trying to latch on to foreign identities, right? Foreign gods.
Mhm.
Um,
And he has this point there in that paragraph where he says this type of remainder, or this uncovered flesh, he says, tends to attract foreign principles which try to cover the unanswered questions. So they could have answered the questions by just asking dad or grandpa, or like Adam was still alive, right? So it's, there's a lot of these things where you could just go back and ask, but no, there is also kind of like a divinatory aspect of this where it's like, no, I'm going to go through the irrational roundabout way of finding out my answer.
Well, or there's no answer. I mean, there are unanswerable. Like everybody thinks there are there's lots of unknown unknowns, right? And actually, there's a lot of unknowable unknowns, and people don't like that. And so then they'll turn to divination, but all divination has an element of uncertainty because it's talking about a specific point in time and a specific state, and not about how that comes about. And it's not 100% guaranteed, and so it's a lot of uncertainty, and that's the problem with divination and with covering. I mean, if you want to cover everything, you're a perfectionist, and that's not going to happen. And you'd also destroy potential and possibility of miracles, and just don't do that.
yeah, and I think with the covering, right? So if you are covered by Adam, like the question isn't the thing because like you're under the covering, so like you're separated from the question, right? Like because you're in your place. But as soon as you peek under the skirt, like, like you lift up the corners, right? Then that question gets a hold on you, right? Like now it gets a pull, right? Or like it will pull you out of the tent, like so.
Yeah, I want to note the diagram, right? Because what happens is you create a ceiling as the result of attracting aliens, and that ceiling confines you, right? Another way to know tyranny, right, is you don't no longer have a direct path up, right? You now have a ceiling that has covered you in a way, right? And so again, you can think of this covering as removal of potential, because that's what it's expressing here, is that there's these foreign principles that have removed your ability to interact with infinite potential above you by creating an unknown ceiling for no reason. So nothing's changed in the bottom part of the diagram at all, like that, because that's all not optional. Like that's the world, it's reality, right? But what has changed is by attracting aliens, you've gotten these foreign principles that are holding you down and keeping you separated from the higher potential and possibilities.
So just to bring this back to modern state of society, um, we have a lot of people that are uncovered, right? They're living in domicide, and what is happening? We are attracting a lot of aliens. And then we
Right,
start
and
we
it's creating a bunch of rules that interfere with the freedoms that we used to have, while being under the guise of the freedoms we used to have, right? But they're not the freedoms we used to have.
and then like they're also trying to collapse the established space, right? Because the established space is inhibiting from accessing the foreign principles. Um, so
There's I thought something that kind of came to mind. You mentioned like under the skirt. I was thinking table skirt. That you have this thing of like doing business under the table, and that you are creating an artificial ceiling over yourself. And you think of people like criminal organizations. You think of like a mafia or something like that. That they're doing all this business under the table, and then you wind up having these unusual interactions. Now you've limited the upper part of your participation because now what would normally be, oh, there's a police officer, like So maybe they'll give me a ticket, but otherwise, like, they're not out to get me, versus like all of the police and all the higher principals and the entire government basically has me on a watch list now because of my participation under the table. You wind up taking on these unnecessary limits by also lowering yourself beneath these things.
Yeah, and the things under the table, they necessarily have less structure, right? Like they have less optionality.
And they invite judgment from above too, because then it's like, oh well, if you're doing business under the table, even if that's in the case of like something monetary, then you're drawing the attention of the IRS. It's like you're drawing their judgment. Maybe it'll happen very, very slowly, but even still.
Yeah. So let me see. So they were giving bird to giants, right? So the giving bird is the creation of something new, right? Like a new identity, a new seed that grows. So the word Nephilim means fallen or aborted, right? Yes. So, like, yeah, I'm in my mind, I'm seeing them as disconnected, right? So, like,
Oh, I wanted to comment real quick on the footnote there. I love the footnotes, man. There's so many good things in the footnotes. But I really like this thing of the hosting angels correctly and incorrectly, because I went back and I checked out the first half of the story of Samson. So you have Abraham and Sarah, which we already talked about in previous chapters, successfully hosting the angels. They provide them food. They preferred the meat, but they still had, they gave them nice hospitality. I think we're actually going to discuss that probably next week. But but then you have this thing of Manoah and his wife. His wife perceives the angel, but the husband does not. So he doesn't have the sight. He's not able to, like, even when he looks at the angel, he just recognizes him as some guy. He only recognizes him as an angel when he leaves. And then he even misidentifies what's going to happen to them as a result of seeing the angel. And actually says, oh, now we're going to die. And it's like, no, he just told you you're going to have a kid in a year. Like, you weren't even listening to him. But he winds up, he refuses the food that they offer, even though it was food that the other angels would have gladly accepted. And that angel is there to give a specific message about the birth of Samson and the requirements of what was needed so that Samson could live a good life. And that was, don't cut his hair, and the mom can never eat something unclean. Not that he can't, but the mom is not allowed to eat anything unclean or fermented. And so I'm kind of connecting between this thing of like giving birth to giants, giving birth to Samson, who is still a man of God, blessed at his birth and even at his death. And then this thing of like giving birth to the foreign invasion. Like, Samson was basically a one-man foreign invasion. But like, you look, he killed 1,000 guys in a day. Like, that's, and then he cracked a joke about it. But when you look at this thing, he still doesn't really have his downfall until after he feeds his mom honey from a lion carcass. That even, that he eats the thing, but just specifically what the angel says, and he even reiterates it again, is that you're not supposed to allow the mom to do it. So you have this sort of breaking of the continuity and this kind of coming back. It's almost like a culinary incest type of thing that's happening there. It calls to mind like the boiling a goat in its mother's milk type of thing, where it's like you have this kind of providing from below, and he's also taking something very low, honey out of a lion carcass, that's going there. And the failing to host happens at multiple scales across time. So you've got the angel doesn't accept their food. They only the wife actually understands the message. And then presumably they never even told Samson. I don't know about what the conditions were. And then he's kind of an og, honestly, if you look at the way he talks. And then you get that thing of just not following directions, or not being extra careful about accepting the message that they gave you.
Oh,
Yeah,
there was a thing that I didn't look up. That was his name was Manoah, which I'm wondering if that's connected to Noah in some way.
Oh. It means place of rest. And what is...
Okay.
And Noah means rest or repose. Yeah.
Okay.
So there is a connection there, yeah.
Yeah, so a couple things that stood out to me, right? Like, so seems that Manoah, right, wasn't a proper father, right, and husband, and that the misidentification of the angel is connected with him, like not feeding his wife properly, right? So he can't he doesn't have discernment, right? So he can't give his wife a proper food, right? So in some sense, the divinity or the relation to the divine that his wife has is being corrupted by him, right? And and she needs to have like this clean thing. Well, we'll get into the clean aspect as well, by the way. At least
There's
next.
Oh, sorry.
At least next week, but yeah. So I'm now thinking about the divine feminine part again, right? And so it's in some sense standing out here, right? It's like, okay, like this woman can have a relationship with the divine as long as she's not tainted by anything. Right? And the moment the taint comes, like everything will fall apart.
I want to connect to, there's the interaction that Mitchell and Mark were having there in the comments about, I think Mitchell asked, like, do angels like ice water or tea? And Mark said to ask them. And that's actually a very important aspect of the thing that I forgot, is that in the case of Abraham and Sarah, and we're going to go over this in the next chapter, is this thing of Abraham asks, if I have found grace in your eyes, will you please stay? And then he offers the hospitality. Whereas in the case of Manoah and his wife, I think Manoah actually says, we want you to stay here and then we're going to give you food. And then the angel says, even though you're detaining me, like the angel is actually submissive to them. It says, even though you detain me, I'm not going to eat. So you can offer it as a burnt offering to God. And then when it burns, he actually goes up with the fire. And then that's when they flip out. But there was this thing of like, oh, we're going to feed you. So no, you're not. But if you say, hey, if you want to stick around, would you like something? That's the difference between the properly hosting and the not.
Yeah. Well, like, have you ever been to a place where it's like, no, you need to eat this? It's like, is this still hospitality, or are we now being compelled?
Yeah, and that's not. Yeah, it's not necessarily clear either, right? Because a good host has to sense your reluctance and whether or not it's coming from a place of politeness or a place of fear, right? Because you can make arguments either way. You can say, well, yeah, if you go to a certain country, they might try to get you to eat their traditional dish, right? It might be something like haggis or something like that stinky shark stuff that they ferment, or whatever it is, right? It could be any number of things, and some of those things are like really good, and some of those things are like, nah, I'm not missing that. But to them, it's a point of local pride or something, and that's where the problem comes in. So it's not it's not easy to discern good and bad things just from, we'll say, the language or even the approach. It's a lot more subtle than that, because there's all this ethereal stuff going on in the background that we barely understand, right? But when you connect it with the symbolism, then it becomes clearer to you, because now you have the contrast to see and the ability to integrate with it, which is, through your participation.
So I'm thinking of yak butter tea, like and things like alcohol in the Asian cultures, right? Where it's like, well, you're refusing to drink with me, right? So now you're suspicious, right? Like now you've loaded something onto yourself because you're not partaking in the custom, right? So there's well, not an inversion, right? But there's an a confirmation that needs to happen to the host as well, because
Well, it's
if
not, but again, it's a negotiation, because not partaking, for example, I don't drink alcohol, right, is not necessarily an insult, even if it's something like sake in Japan, which would be used, for some sort of transactional integration. And so again, it's just not, you can't divide these things clearly, right? So there's a refusal to participate, and then there's a correct negotiated participation, right? And then there's the refusal to try to integrate it all, which is a totally different thing, right? Like, if you don't see the possibility of integration, you're just rejecting it, right? You're automatically opposed, we'll say, right? That's why there's no such thing as opponent processing. Proper processing requires integration, and integration requires lack of opposition entirely, like zero opposition, right? And so negotiation is a different thing. And if you don't have those three things differentiated, it's very hard, right? Because opposition is basically, I'm going to participate alone. I'm going to participate my way, irrespective of all other factors, right? When you start respecting other factors, then you're looking at participating and integrating rather than opposing, because you can still participate without integrating. It's just you're alone. And then people wonder why they're in domicile. I'm like, well, you kind of put yourself there.
yeah, that was actually in the divine feminine discussions, like that really came forward, right? Because like what ends up happening, right, is like, well, you project on the interaction, right? It's like, okay, like this has this meaning, right? But it hasn't come to fruition yet, right? And that's the horrible part as well. It's like you might even be right, right? Like you might even be right that something can't happen, right? But if you deny the option for the thing to happen in the first place, now you're making a different transgression, right? Like now you're basically you're exiling someone without them having committed the crime or something. It's like, well, like that's not
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and significantly too, I think the problem is, you know, everybody wants to talk about these things and reveal them in some propositional mode. And the fact that no one can answer, and this is explicit, no one can answer in words, what is a woman, should have been a hint to everybody that you shouldn't be talking about this, because you can't. It's not possible, right? In the same way, you shouldn't be talking about the potential of what's going to happen next week, right? So there was a trend that happened. We used to do 3-day forecasts in the whole U.S. Pretty much every 3-day forecasts, and they moved to the extended 5-day forecast over time, and now they're at the 7-day forecast. Okay, so the hit rate for 5-day forecast was somewhere in the 40% range, generally speaking. The hit rate in the 7-day forecast is not that high. Right. And that's because you're trying to reveal something that it cannot be revealed. Even at 5 days, even at 3 days, it's not like it goes up that high, right? Like, prediction is hard, even in something simple like the weather, which is to some extent purely material. And that's why it's helpful to think in frames of things which should be spoken about, things which shouldn't be spoken about, right? And so one of the great I'll say great lessons that I think, say Peterson's Maps of Meaning lectures gives to you is the idea of do the thing, right? Doesn't matter what the thing is, you just got to do it, right? And that concept of preparation. Now, if you're busy preparing for the divine feminine to manifest, and you don't have enough time and energy to talk about it, and it'll just happen. You don't need to discuss it. It's supposed to remain veiled or hidden for a reason, and that reason is actually related to all of this, right? Which is order and disorder. You are disordering beauty by dragging it down into the realm of the propositional, right? Or into the realm of language as such. I can't tell you how beautiful a rose is. It doesn't make any sense. And it will never be able to be made any sense of. You may be able to speak about aspects of beauty in a rose, but that's not the same thing.
I think I want to just add, I guess, to your horror that they're actually up to 10-day weather forecasts now. And I think that's what Google has been presenting. And you have this whole thing of like even exceeding like the cycle block of 7. You have the whole thing where like, oh, was it the French that tried doing the 10-day work week or something insane? And you just wind up flattening everything out. Oh, it has to be a nice, perfectly even number. And it's like, well, you're just going to get an over encroaching on the margin there. You're going to get people overworked, or you're going to get wrong weather forecasts.
You're eliminating the margin entirely, which is why the metric system is actually evil, technically speaking. Just flat out. Sorry. Hate to say it.
I agree.
I'm pretty sure we got up to 2 weeks. Bunch of noobs.
Wow.
Although they've reduced the things that they predict.
Well, yeah, and the RJ has a great comment here about weather statistics, right? When they describe the quote likelihood of rain, they're not describing the likelihood of rain, right? They're describing the amount of land expected to have rainfall within a region, and that region is often undefined, by the way.
Going back to Nephilim. So they're talking about the union of a head that is too high for humanity and a body that is too low for humanity. Like, are we supposed to interpret that as the things manifesting outside of the established space? How are you guys reading that?
As comical as it is to imagine, those really low feet and just a giant forehead up there, it's something that kind of reminds me of this is King Solomon. He wrote something about there's like the foreign woman, like specifically like even religiously foreign, that like her feet go down to death. So there is that sort of thing of like being grounded, but being grounding extremely low. And then there is also kind of like there's sort of an implication of being very tall, but this extreme like stretching between the principle and the grounding.
Yeah, what's the confusion with the highlight? I mean
Well, like the problem I have is the for humanity, right? So if you're saying, well, the union of a head that's too high with a body that's too low, okay, I get that, right? But why is it related to humanity?
because that's the scale. Like too high and too low makes no sense without an anchoring scale. So that's the anchoring scale.
But I think further on, he talks about how the actual bodies of these giants were not just very large humans, or just even very strong humans, like in the case of Samson, but that they were supposed to have had like monstrous characteristics, like hybridization with animals and stuff.
Hmm.
So I guess that would be, if you have like the legs of a goat or something like that, then that would be a body too low for you.
Oh, that sounds okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, like the association I had is that they're out of proportion, right? So they're not conforming to their functionality. And I guess having I guess if we're looking at animalistic qualities, like that would be like a regression into nature, right?
Well, the body's stronger, right? But the giants are born higher than humans. And again, because too high and too low is relative. You have to have a point of scale. And the point of scale is the human. They were born higher than us, right? But they're stronger than us. They're lower than us in that sense. And probably also in the sense of, quote, intelligence or something.
There's also, I mean, even just on the natural level, you think of people who have like medical gigantism, that a lot of times those guys have, like the very low things are like minerals are very brittle. And you have this thing where a lot of times they have very brittle bones or they have joint issues and those sorts of things. Gravity acts on them very heavily because of their excess weight, which they're just not capable of maintaining. And a lot of those like a lot of those guys wind up having like either musculoskeletal issues or heart issues or whatever because they can't maintain the structure very well.
Just hold me if you want to.
Did you want to highlight RJ's comment here on recognizing? Yeah, recognizing how to respect and relay the mysteries of that beauty is essential of the poetic. Yeah, I think that's sort of important to mention, is that even, like I said, like with understanding the giants, right? These are many to many connections, right? Because anything can be too high and too low at some scale. So that designators don't help much unless you're tying everything together in a way that they fit, not in an arbitrary way, which is often the problem with this book in particular. Some of the other people's book clubs who've done this book, right? They just tie together random things that don't work, right? Because there's
Are
ways
they
to make things
hybridizing?
tie together. Yeah, and I think that's another symbolic representation of giants, is of tying together things in an inappropriate way, which is why, again, the head's too high but the body's too low.
I think to point out RJ's other comment that you just put in here about the great men of renown, it's a category that includes Nimrod through Goliath. That also, like the guys that were associated with Goliath, like there was one guy that had like 6 toes or something like that on each foot. Like you get this kind of extended multiplication of things. I like the image of, even though it's not relevant to this thing, but of like the Cyclops, where it's like you got the kind of simplicity up top, and then a lot of times you got like this excess below, whether it's in like overall size or if it's in like the multiplicity or something like that. You get the thing of like way too many teeth or something like that with those guys. I wanted to, I guess there's this thing of that the Nephilim are credited with the teaching of all manner of confusion to humanity. I just want to kind of, I mean, even though it's obvious we already talked about it, but just to call back to the fact that these are the children of people who, of at least humans, who have accepted principles that are too high for them or that they couldn't integrate, but also created a ceiling for themselves. So you have confusion being taught by the people who are the product of like this collapse of boundaries or collapse of scales or a lack of understanding of potential or something like that. And you wind up getting all of these unusual things. And having grown up in Southern California, like actually all of these things I saw growing up. So like, you get fusion restaurants and like hybridized like luxury dog breeds, and you can't have a song that doesn't have a rap interlude. And there's just like everything has to be smashed with as many possible things, multiple languages in the same sentence, and people actually speaking that way, like people actually kind of speaking almost like a sort of pidgin sometimes, where they've got like 2 or 3 different languages that they're combining together, or coming up with constant new slang terms, those sorts of things. And then that point of that it's often interpreted, or that it can be interpreted as a desire to reverse the first work of Adam. So, and there's that same thing of like, how do you define a woman? Like, Adam was the first person to actually define what a woman is. He was literally right there. It's bone by bone, flesh by flesh. There you have it. But yeah, and then it's the return to primordial fluidity. So then you have all the people identifying as fluid something, or changing their mind about whatever they're identifying as, or what they're identifying something else as, like, from week to week.
Yeah, so like I want to point out the the confusion, right? So the hybridization is important to realize that. Well, yeah, when you keep drinking from whatever well, right? That you can't build anything, right? Like you can't walk by a path, because like you don't build a relationship to what sustains you, right? So you, like, if you think of your digestive system, right? Like you need to acclimate to the food that you're consuming in some manner, right? And if you're not used to the kitchen that is feeding you, then the nutritional value and the way that it can sustain you is limited, right? Like, even if the potential is there, uh, and we have to maybe make that point a lot, right? Like even if the potential is there to be sustained by something, doesn't mean that it will sustain you. like like you have to be fathered by it, right? Like you have to, like, it has to inform you first.
That's like, a person that's under stress only absorbs something like 20% of the nutrients of the things that they eat. So even if they are acclimated to it, and it's something that is very nutrient dense, that if the person is very stressed, they're also just not even getting any of that stuff. If they're in a flooded or confused state, then they can't even integrate what they are used to.
Yeah, or they have a different ailment, right? Like,
Mhm.
because ailments do that to you.
Yeah.
Right. So I think thinking of the flesh is that which hosts the spirit, right? Like, if that which holds the spirit is corrupted, then no proper spirits can find house. Oh yeah, so like it is interesting that I highlighted this, right? So it's carrying, right? So when you were talking at the start, Castle, you were talking about grounding, walking, and my association there was like, how do you carry yourself, right? um and so, like, when you miscarried, right, like, you're not a proper vessel, right? Like, you're not you're not being, I guess, you're carried by a being, right? And so you're not carrying that being properly, right?
I think there's the connection there with food as well. Like with the not being able to process the nutrients correctly. We've had this thing in previous chapters of like the woman raises the food, and it also does that in the microcosm for the gestating baby. That there is that thing of there are outside conditions, the way that we had the previous diagram at the start of this chapter of like, oh, the interior microcosm gets messed up, and then that has the consequences on the outside. But then the miscarriage is kind of like consequences on the outside, having, you know, because a person could also miscarry as a result of an injury or something like that, or a vitamin deficiency. You can have those sorts of things, and then you have kind of the encroaching of the outside on the in, you know, affecting that interior microcosm.
Yeah, you inspired me to think about these food orgies that they used to have in the Middle Ages, and I think the Romans as well, right? Where they puke, right? So they mis miscarry the purpose of the food, like because they just ate it for eating, not for sustenance.
Mm,
And so there's something when you pervert something or divert something from its purpose, right? Where it doesn't carry cannot hold that purpose anymore, right?
yeah, and bulimia is still a thing too, and it, you know, thankfully, I hope not as prevalent, but my goodness, it probably is more out there than I think. But it's almost, it's like, yeah, it's like prostitution on the culinary scale or something like that.
It's called gluttony. They have a word for that. Okay.
It's, you know, I was thinking about this with respect to gluttony, and then you got the two manifestations of the gourmet and the gourmand. So the gourmet is the one who really likes high quality food, and
Mm-hmm.
but you could think of like there's gluttony in that aspect because you think, oh, they're very precise about exactly what they want. Maybe they don't eat much.
Yeah.
Maybe they're very skinny. Maybe they actually swallow it and they're not
And
bulimic or
it's the
anything like that.
princess with the P, right? Like,
Right, yeah, it has to be perfect. Oh, the tea is too warm, it's too cold, you know, the egg isn't cooked exactly how I want. That's the gourmet. And then you got the gourmand whose principal pleasure comes from just constantly just downing all the food that they possibly can. And it's like there's the two poles of gluttony right there.
yeah. So then we're having the awesome word of opposites again, which I oppose. um, but yeah, like I just like joining without a point would be sufficient to me, right? It's like why do you have to join opposites? Like you just join things, and so like if they don't have a point, they can't commune, right? Like, but like I don't see the necessity of the opposites. Mm.
Although it's in the context of confusion, waste, and vanity. So that it might actually, even though it's completely wrong to do that, it might actually be correct to point at it this way because the person who's doing that is being wasteful, confused, and vain by trying to join opposites without a point. I think of that with like just that thing where they would talk about like Latin X, but they would group like two different South American countries that actually really hated each other. And so they would do that to like join them under a common banner, even though they were maybe even actually physically at war. And it's like, oh well, now it's like that is confused and vain. Then like it's self-serving to show, oh look at how inclusive I am, and then
So,
I'm joining these people that hate each other so that I can look good.
so you're saying that the way to see this is like you're trying to iron something flat that's not flat.
Yeah,
uh,
it's there's this thing where it
uh,
says primitive giants are often associated with cannibalism and boastfulness as a symbol of cyclical vanity. So you've got that. Here's that hybridization again, where it's like, oh, these people are at war, but let's just smash them together. Look at how nice of a person I am. I solved it. You know, it's just like, yeah, it's vain and it's wasteful and it's confused.
yeah, it's like paving something, right? Yeah. Um, okay. eating yourself, naming yourself, our favorite activities. Right. There's a footnote, Castle.
There is. I actually even have it highlighted. That
Like you just highlight the footnotes and then you find there is something to say about it.
yeah.
Like,
Oh
I
yeah, it's
know.
great. Well, my entire intention is based on feet and taking steps. Of course, I'm going to do that. But yeah, let's take a step into this one. So yeah, that they're credited with promoting bestiality. It's interesting because of the too high and too low thing. That
Yeah.
on the angelic scale, like that, like intermarrying with humans is actually bestiality. And so of course the pattern would be promoted as repeating there. And then you get that weird thing of like, what do you get as the result? You get those people that wasn't there some guy that spent like $60,000 on a dog costume or something like that that actually made him not just like the ones that look like mascots, but he actually looks like an actual dog. Um, something just absolutely insane. He was like some sort of CEO or businessman or something like that. He had that kind of cash, but it's like, what is going on there? But that is like trying to embody something too low for you is, you know, like that is that same pattern as like a fallen angel trying to possess something.
Yeah, and that goes back to the domicide aspect, right? Like if you're too high, because if you're CEO, right, like you're not grounded in society, and
Mm.
like how do you ground yourself? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm
like
sure
that.
the natural solution is just become a dog because there's
Well,
nothing
yeah.
in between, right?
Well, OnlyFans is a thing that everybody reaches for, right?
Uh,
Yeah. Like anyway. Um. Yeah. So I was thinking on the next page, right? Like I guess I just had to read this far to get the insights. But the giants are like entities, right? Existences, beings, uh, separate from the will of God, right? Which makes them also temporal in nature because they can't sustain beyond uh, a certain generation, right? Uh, but yeah, like they have a space, right? Like, and well, when we're talking about dominion in this sense, right? I would argue, yeah, like they have dominion, right? Like they have uh, uh, an emanation onto the earth around them from their high vantage points. Um,
I think the issue with that Dominion is that it's because they've looked down and they're no longer like capable of looking up to the infinite potential that they have put in a sort of circular, maybe spherical sense. They have put this giant ceiling over themselves arbitrarily that then caps their participation. So it's like there is this sort of self-serving aspect that it also kind of like the self-serving of an addiction or something like that. That you can't help but look low, and then you wind up getting kind of like locked in.
yeah, because everything that they relate to is below them, right? So they don't have, like, it's not that they couldn't look up, but they don't have the capability to look up. And like I want to go back to what was it? Uh, yeah, Manoah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why can't he see the identity of the angel? Well, because he's looking down onto the angel. Like I think that's the issue, right? And then because you're looking down, you're like, oh yeah, you should sit here, right? It's like, well, yeah, I could sit there, right? And it's like that's not in conflict with my identity. And if you're gonna make me sit there, like I can't represent God in your household, right? Like, like, um, So what are you hosting? Well, you're hosting my presence, right? You're not hosting my being that you get to partake in. And yeah, so that's maybe rolling it up around the hosting, right? Um, so yeah, uh, don't be a giant dick. Um, I mean that's pretty cool. I like it. So do we have suggestions on the reflection? And then we're just gonna dig around. Great. Um, so I think this the Nephilim thing, right, and the being fruitful and the being a proper host. I think that's important, right? So it's like when the foreign enters and you're more invested in giving it a place in your house than that you're invested in integrating the foreign, um, I think you will break your house, but you will flood it. And um, there's two ways that you can do that. Now that I think of it, right? So one is sit there, right? This is your place. This is your food. And the other one is don't break my thing, right? So you see it as a threat. And that would be the feminine aspect, where you have the masculine thing where it's like, no, like you're my house, my rules, or uh yeah, you're not gonna get into my house because like whatever, like you're gonna contaminate my purity or whatever, right? Um so is that sufficient to inspire an intention? I think so. Okay, then I'll do a reflection. Well, what do we have?
Well, I was just still thinking about the is there about the poorly hosting aspect, this thing of trying to overly control, and then in a certain sense winding up making these unnecessary limitations on yourself. And I was thinking about this with like the people would have idols in their houses, and so I guess they still do that. But you think about like in these sort of biblical times, like they would have like an actual wooden idol and those sorts of things that you're trying to contain a spirit within a body that you can move from like one shelf to another or something like that. It's immobile. Um, this thing you're trying to invoke something, but no, it has its place right there. I still run this place and everything, but then ultimately it's like, well, okay, but you're also ordering your life around it, and you're inviting instability into your house, and that thing of like, oh well, I also want to avoid something bad happening, and then you can wind up, because you're going in a roundabout way and doing this weird cyclical behavior like divination or idol worship or whatever, that you're actually inviting more of that. So you wind up saying, oh, I'm going to stick with this thing because it's, this thing is going to help me so that I don't wind up ending up in a bad situation. And then you wind up running into that exact thing. Like I would see that as well. I didn't mention, I mentioned all the hybrid dogs and stuff, but there's also the fact that there's fortune tellers all over where I used to live. And so you'd have these people that would do the tarot cards and all these different things, and you would get people, they would spend a massive amount of money asking about their financial success in the future. It's just like, well, oh yes, of course you're going to do very well, and it's just like, well, you're going to keep coming back to do that, and it's like, well, the person that's facilitating this is participating in a spirit whether they know it or not. And ultimately you wind up ending up in this feedback loop of kind of, that's also like the divination thing is also kind of like a spiritual prostitution, I guess. I mean, we've already covered culinary and we've covered the actual thing, so why not go to that scale as well? But it really is a lot of just cutting corners. I mean, it ultimately becomes this kind of thing, like anything but God, essentially, like anything but the hierarchy he established. Because if you're actually dealing with an angel, like they're going to understand hierarchy and they're going to be submissive. Like you look at these stories of Abraham and Manoah, and with like, even when you're being rude to the angel, like he's still submitting, like he's being extremely polite for how rude you're being. And it's like, if they understand, like and also if you're participating in the hierarchy that's above them, then they're not going to lead you astray. Like you think of it was in like Revelation where was Saint John the Apostle like falls on his face and like almost worships the angel, and the angel's like, that's enough. He was like, you get back up here, that's not appropriate. So yeah, they'll stop you if you're hosting something appropriate. Like it'll also inform you of what you're supposed to be doing. It'll tell you when you're doing something that's wrong. Whereas if you're doing something that is self-serving or self-destructive, then it's just going to let you do it. Or even worse, it's all in your head. Like if you've just got like a wooden idol in your house and you're just projecting something into it, and it's just like, well, no, you're just like, that's, something's going to wind up moving in at some point. So.
Yeah, so I was thinking about hosting, and I'm like, yeah, but why are you even hosting things? Right? Well, you host something because you invite it in, or it announces itself at your doorstep, right? Like that's the two options, right? And like with one, you have a purpose, right? So y- you can give things a place somewhat, right? But when something announces itself at your door, you don't know what it brings, right? And like your purpose should be not to be wiped away by the flood that it's announced, right? Like when the army stands at your door, like your purpose should not be, well, you should sit at the left side of the table instead of the right side. It's like that's not where your attention ought to be, right? Um, so yeah, like hosting, like Mark was talking about discernment, right? And it's like you kind of also want to establish the nature of what you're hosting, right? Like, are you a bringer of good news or bad news? Are you here to stay, or are you gonna go? Like, all of these things are relevant, right? Because like, if you got some tough shit coming at you and it's gonna go again, it's like, well, you you don't have to adjust, right? You just weather the storm. Like that's completely different modality than, no, like we're an occupational force, and like there's gonna be a new normal, like some phrasing that was used recently.
I'm thinking of, with respect to the occupational force, you can think of like just a police officer asking for your license and registration or something. Or it's like, well, you could poorly host that situation very easily. There's videos of people doing that where they immediately go, "Am I being detained?" It's like, "Sir, you were speeding. License and registration." It's like, well,
Sir, I only went 15 over the speed limit.
right.
It's like,
It's like,
"Hey, you went 15 over? Oh, okay. Let's write you a ticket."
yeah, I think the negotiations are just kind of just normal interaction with the police officer or other authority. I think is a good microcosm of the of sort of hosting, and something that is, especially if it's a legitimate good angel, like it's higher than you in the authority, in the hierarchy of authority anyway. So it's like, well, okay, you might as well just start there. It's like, oh, how do I deal with this thing? It's like, start with police officer and work up. Like that's kind of, you know, whatever would work in that scenario. That's probably sufficient.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like, yeah. Like, so what you're actually saying is, when you are relating to an authority that has force, the ability to uh, enact force upon you, you should not take things for granted, because then you're going to overstep. And I think that's the baseline uh, foundation of your relationship that you're in, right? Like, if you're in front of a big guy, right? Like, that big guy can just like knock you out, right? And if you don't take that into account, then one time you're gonna get knocked out.
Yeah, you've got to have. I mean, there's kind of the foresight there, and also if it's potentially like not a legitimate authority, or maybe it's an authority that's overstepping itself. That there's also like aligning yourself to the ultimate highest authority, and then just kind of participating in the way that would reflect. So there's the render unto Caesar aspect, but then there's also like, no, Caesar, I'm not going to light incense in front of your gods, type of thing. And it's like there is that sort of difference where it's like, I'll give you the stuff on your level. Yes, the coins with your face on them you can have, but I'm not going to wave the incense in front of a statue of your wife or whatever.
Christopher, final words.
Oh, I'm just thinking about this kind of in terms of integration, and what can you integrate and at what level. There's things you can host. You can host this thing inside your house. Maybe this other thing you can't host it inside your house. You have to go somewhere else for that. And there's some things like waving incense in front of Caesar. You just can't have anything. You can't have that anywhere else. You have to get that as far as away as possible from that, or so.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about repurposing now, right? So like, there's this thing about the Napoleonic armies, the armies of Napoleon. Okay, there we go. That went into churches and made them into stables and barracks and all of these things, right? And you see now the repurposing of churches, right? So they don't want to get rid of them, right? But they don't want to maintain their function, right? They don't want to host God in the house of God, so they will host other things in the house of God. And so, like one is like Napoleon knocking on the door, right? And the other one is, well, like the children of God are leaving, right? Like they're vacating the premises, and then things move themselves in. Well, that is we're moving ourselves out, and we got a really successful 3 chapters, right? Um, and there's not that much left, so I don't know, like what's going to move in here? A vacuum. Okay, well, see you all next week, and we'll have more crazy things.